Welcome to the What Paramedics Want podcast series of Inside EMS, sponsored by Pulsera. Whether replacing radio reports, alerting specialty teams, or managing mass casualty incidents, Pulsera simplifies communication, one tool every day, regardless of the event. Well, here it is. It's time to go inside EMS. I am your host, Chris Saballera. Last show of the year. We've finally gotten through another year. And here he is, my partner, Kelly Grayson, KG. How the heck are you doing in this holiday season?
I spent this morning trying to slay God's free little creatures, and with middling success. I'm going to go again tomorrow. But
one of the things that the audience doesn't get to hear is certainly the discussions we have before we start recording.
Yeah.
And it's always something that amuses me with my city background. But we were talking about eating squirrel dumplings and hunting for squirrels. I mean, squirrel is the most tastiest. When I was in survival school at Fairchild Air Force Base, I wound up, we were doing, land survival, and it's cold, and we caught these squirrels. And we were going to make squirrel soup out of them. And thought I was so excited to get something hot in me because, that's when you're chilled to the bone, man. I mean, you just can't get warm. And that was the most gross, nasty.
Okay, dude. It's a bunch of Air Force dudes cooking it in the woods. What do you expect?
Whatever, man.
Squirrel dumplings is awesome.
Air Force dudes cooking it in the woods. Is that what you said?
Nancy, when I told her I wanted to make squirrel dumplings, she forbids me to bring wild game into the house, so I have to keep my kills in the game freezer outside. But she hates that idea of wild game. When I told her about squirrel dumplings, and the old-fashioned way to cook it is they cooked it with the squirrel heads and everything and ate the squirrel brains. I don't do that. My grandmother cooked it for me the first time, and head rolled out on the plate, and I went, I let Grandma handle that one. And Nancy thought I was pulling her leg until we were watching Duck Dynasty one night, and Miss Kay cooked Phil a batch of squirrel dumplings, and he went, squirrel brains. And she realized I was on the up and up.
Yeah, I got to tell you, man, when I was in the Air Force, two guys, one from Tennessee, one from West Virginia, they were trying to figure out how to trap this groundhog and take him back to the house for some victuals. And
I don't know if I've eaten a lot of wild game. I've eaten raccoon. I've eaten possum, not willingly, when some poor family lets you hunt on their land and they invite you for a stew, and you eat the stew and you find out that it's raccoon, you smile and you go ahead and eat it. And actually, raccoon is not bad. I wouldn't eat possum again, but raccoon wasn't bad.
Whatever, man. They got regular food in the supermarket.
Yeah, well, I don't go out hunting raccoons. That's just not my thing. But the meat is not horrible.
I do think that the raccoons are going to rise up and take over, but that's a whole other show. Kelly, it's been a crazy year, man. I mean, I think there are a lot of things that happened in EMS. I think there's a lot of things that happened this year in the regular news. And one of the things that we thought for our end of year show, again, going into year 12, can you imagine year 12? We got to think about our exit here. How long are we going to do this? I mean, as soon as I need a cane, it's probably time that we have to move on. But there were a few crazy in EMS one this year. And we thought what we would do in our year-end show is to kind of talk about the 5 crazy stories that were on EMS one this year. And the first one is, and you and I love to do the news, right? And the first is shelter-in-place order extended indefinitely during Georgia chemical plant fire. And it was approximately 17,000 people were evacuated earlier. Several roads were closed after the fire at the biolab facility. And this was in September 30th, 2024. I promise I'll get the words out. But when we start to think about this story, this was one that made news and actually had a lot of comments online. And I really didn't understand why. And I think that's one of the things that makes it crazy.
Well, in public safety, everybody's an expert about someone else's call. And in firefighting, you're going to get a bunch of firefighters watching how this fire was handled, and they're going to have critiques and comments the same way we would when patient care is involved, and you see some of the crap that passes for medical EMS care in the news. But, the fact that they sheltered in place and were playing it very safe about this entire thing leads me to remember the fertilizer plant explosion in West Texas a few years back. And not only was that quite a spectacular explosion, it killed a few firefighters. And, better safe than sorry. With a shelter in place, you wonder, since this is a chemical plant, what kind of fumes there might be. But apparently the people involved in containing that disaster thought that the hazard of sheltering in place was less than clogging up the roadways and that sort of thing. What would you do? You were a service manager at this point, and you've dealt with some mass casualty stuff and some critical incidents like the Ferguson riots. Were you sending your people to help manage this fire, to do medical standby at the fire? How would you approach it?
Let me preface it by saying this. One of the things that I found interesting in the article was this was the third time in 7 years that fire had ignited at the plant. So if I was a service manager in this area, I would have ensured that my people were trained in this type of response, right? So we probably would have needed some types of masks, maybe some types of suit, but we would have had to be able to train. We would have had to be able to prepare. One of the things that I used to do as a best practice when I was on the operational side of EMS was whatever big event happened, and Kelly, you know as well as I do, usually at some time during the event, and I started this with the Aurora shooting, there is always 911 or there's always radio
overload
that comes over, right? So one of the things that I would always do as a best practice is I would gather the leaders, I would gather the supervisors, I would gather members of the workforce, and we would take the call and we would listen to it as if it was our own call, and we would take it step by step. Now, this happened at the corner of here and here. What do we do right now? Okay, now this is happening in this segment. What are we doing here? And then we would write those out and we would store them for the inevitability of when those things would happen there. And I don't think that we take that knowledge. It's unfortunate that the cities and the agencies have to go through some of the challenges that they go through, but all EMS agencies need to learn from that, and they need to develop their own plans for the inevitability of when those things happen. Now, do we all have a chemical plant in our backyard? No, but we all have tractor trailers and we all have tankers that go through our coverage area with chemicals in them. But this was an interesting call. This was an interesting story.
And the fact that there were or third time in 7 years that a fire broke out there, you would think that the local fire department probably had done some liaison and pre-planning in case that event happened again, so that they wouldn't be caught by surprise. And this plant being the primary supplier of pool and spa chemicals, chlorine gas is nothing to mess with. So I would imagine, staying in the house probably and keeping your doors and windows closed would probably be the best option. Well, let's move to our next one. A Michigan driver was ejected in a fiery crash and landed on the roof of a house. So now you got multiple trauma and high angle rescue. And this happened in September in Saginaw, Michigan. I wonder how cold it was up there and if that roof was slippery. Probably not, but
not with a fire going on, I wouldn't think.
No, well, the fire was the vehicle, but 4:20 p.m. on September the 7th, Saginaw, Michigan, firefighters and police responded to a wreck near the corner of Hess Avenue. A gray Chevy Silverado struck a one-story house, and the truck driver, a 28-year-old Bridgeport Township man, was lying on the roof of the house, pretty severely injured. Chris, how many times have we heard some Yahoo, or God forbid, one of our own colleagues say, I don't wear my seatbelt because I was thrown clear from a wreck, and if I'd have stayed in it, I'd have been killed or I'd have been burnt alive. And we all collectively roll our eyes at that kind of nonsense. But looking at the picture there, this might be the one case where getting ejected was the best thing for him. What do you think?
I got to tell you, man. I mean, I don't know that I've ever heard anybody talk like that either. So that
Oh God, man, every
that
redneck in
well,
Louisiana.
I don't know, man, but that was just really interesting. But you know, it's funny because when we talked about this story, one of the things that was interesting is in my I don't forget where I was living. Maybe I was living in Florida. There was a car that was traveling at a high rate of speed, hit the curb, and wind up striking a telephone pole back in the days of telephone poles about 10 feet in the air. And the car actually impaled onto the telephone pole. It was kind of stuck there in midair. And it was really kind of interesting. But it just goes to show you that in these traumas, in these types of events, you don't know where you're going to find these people. I mean,
Oh
Kelly,
yeah.
how many times have you been on a call where there was one person, come to find out there's another person and you don't know where the heck they are yet? You
Well,
know,
it happens so often. There's an adage about it. You know, if you work a wreck after midnight and you don't find a drunk, keep looking because someone is missing.
that's right.
And my very first code as a paramedic was a trauma code, and we were on that scene for 15 minutes looking around, and finally had decided that whoever was in the accident had left the scene, and I had called told them there were no patient found, and right after I said that on the radio, my partner said, "Hey Kelly," and
Well,
he was 154 feet behind the truck in the ditch, face down, in cardiac arrest. And in those days, you know, unless it was if it was anything other than asystole, we worked it.
that's
And
right. And
he had
transported
an
it.
agonal rhythm, and I screwed that code up beyond all belief. You know, I was absolutely unprepared with just a two-man crew to work that traumatic arrest. So
You know, it's always amazed me at the at how much damage the body can take, right?
yeah, yeah,
How much trauma that body can take, and really what happens. I've seen things that look like they were benign. I mean, you even think about the crash that killed Dale Earnhardt. When you look at it and he hits
it
that
looks
wall,
fairly mild.
you don't think he hits that wall, but at 227 miles, he hits that wall pretty hard. I
Yeah,
once ran a call for a guy who, let's say, indulged in some street narcotics that goes in your nasal cavity
yeah,
and jumped out a third story plate glass window. And when I arrived on scene, I was like to the fire captain, I'm like, where's the patient? He's standing next to me, all
yeah,
waiting for,
yeah,
but it's just craziness what goes on when we have these things happen
yeah,
in our life. But let's go to number three.
yeah.
And this one was 911 calls for a fatal Florida sandhole collapse released. So a 7-year-old girl passed away inside the 4 to 5 foot deep hole while her and her brother were digging in Fort Lauderdale or Lauderdale by the Sea beach. And this one was February 22, 2024. But this was a crazy call. I mean,
Yeah.
you see kids on the beach all the time. And then all of a sudden now they're swallowed up by a 4 to 5 foot hole. And unfortunately, a 7-year-old Indiana girl died from her injuries. But this is nothing you expect to happen on the beach when you go there with your family.
No. You know, in rural settings, trench rescue is something you have to learn, and construction areas, and getting people out of grain bins is a big thing in rural areas. And the techniques to get
They
someone,
train that all the time.
yeah, and they train that, and that probably would have been effective here. But how often do you expect a collapse at the beach? But this is not the first time this has happened, and probably will not be the last. There have been a number of news stories of people suffocating and collapsing sand holes, or being left or being buried in sand for fun with their head sticking out, and the weight of the sand pressed their chest so much that they couldn't breathe, and they coded. This is just one of those freaky things, and one of the things that we don't often think about and thus plan for. I remember when I took my paramedic instructor class years ago, one of the case studies we did was in Florida, I believe it was, a sinkhole opened up in this guy's yard as he was mowing. And he fell through the sinkhole. It was about 7 feet down, and it was a collapsed sewer line. And he fell into this, and fire department got on scene, go and look at him. They can see him down in the hole. They stick an extension ladder down in the hole. They're going to get him back up out, and the firefighter lowered himself in the hole and didn't have his SCBA on. And within seconds, he was overcome and down. And it wound up being like 2 or 3 firefighters down and the dead guy because of the sewer gas, methane gas,
Oh, yeah.
overcame them in that hole. We often don't think of those things, these oxygen poor environments, and how it can be in these deep, deep places. But that's a freaky one, and not something you see every day.
No, you
Let's
don't.
talk about.
Well,
Go
hang on
ahead.
one second. One of the things that I was thinking while you were talking was the silo grain training that people do. And
Yeah.
it gave me a lot of questions more than I had some answers. So if you're out there and you're in one of the agencies that have trained in those types of evacuations or rescues, go ahead and reach out to us at the show at ems1.com. We probably want to get that person on. I'd love to learn a little bit more about this and what goes into it, because we've seen the movie. I forget the movie. I think it was the movie Witness, where actually one guy is consumed by grain in a silo, and it might be an interesting show. I don't know. We'll see what
Yeah.
happens
And,
for 2025.
silo rescue or grain bin rescue and silo firefighting is an art in and of itself.
Yeah.
And grain dust is nothing to take lightly. That stuff can ignite, and it's quite a horrific explosion when it does.
It does. But before we go, let's go ahead and take a quick break, Kelly. I know
Yeah.
you want to get through them because they're crazy calls, but let's go ahead and take a quick break. We are going to come back at the end. We've got 2 more stories for you on this year-ending show. Let's go ahead and roll that tape. Pulsera scales to meet your dynamic communication needs. From routine patient alerts to managing large-scale emergencies, every responder and clinician connect seamlessly. Familiar yet powerful, Pulsera streamlines your response. From routine transfers to regional disasters, it's one tool every day, regardless of the event. Discover more at pulsera.com. We are back. We have 2 more stories to talk about, the craziest stories of 2024 that got the most comments and people talking about it. And Kelly, I got to tell you, this story was downright crazy. I'll let you set it up since I did the last one.
Yeah, we go from a crazy sandhole collapse to another gnarly rescue. It happened in Louisville, Kentucky. A tractor trailer that was knocked dangling off a bridge over the Ohio River. The driver, a female driver, you've probably seen this YouTube clip. It's gone around social media. The driver cam shows the driver's perspective of going over this guardrail, and she really couldn't control it. It wasn't her fault, and she went over the rail, and her semi is just dangling there by the trailer. And it was pretty awesome. She wasn't injured, and a Louisville firefighter was lowered over the side to bring her to safety. But imagine the pucker factor. I know firefighters are a different breed. Probably like us in some regards. They look at that and go, "Oh, this is cool. I'd love to go do that." And he was probably itching to do it. And normal human beings don't. Are petrified of that sort of thing. But good job on that. The southbound vehicle hit a stalled car, and it crossed into her lane and struck her, and she ran off over the barrier on the side. Chris, you ever seen something like this?
This is not the first time we have seen something like this. There's a couple times, but I mean, this cab has got to be dangling what looks like 10 feet off that bridge.
Oh yeah,
we'll put all these.
The rear wheels aren't even holding the thing up. It's just kind of wedged there.
Right, and we're going to post all these links in the show notes, so go ahead and check them out. One of the things that we need to do eventually is, if we're doing this on video, we need to, if we have these types of videos that we're looking at right now, is to kind of put them into the show so people can kind of see on our YouTube channel what we're talking about. But I got to tell you what, man, this was pretty gnarly, and you have to be able to secure that truck, I would think, before you start lowering yourself down to that cab, because you don't know what pressure you put on the top of that cab that's going to send that truck into the river. And I don't know how far that is to the river bottom, but
quite a ways.
I got to think you're going to hit that pretty hard.
Yeah. Have you ever worked a wreck on top of one of those tall bridges?
Yeah.
It is, you don't notice it when you're going over it at highway speed in a car, but when you stop, you feel out how much it bounces. And there's a now condemned bridge, and it's still in function, but until they can replace it. But the bridge over the Calcasieu River at Lake Charles, Louisiana, really tall bridge. It was designed that cargo ships could get under it, pass under it without having to lower anything. And the span on that bridge, the center span, is metal grating, and it is slippery as can be. You stand on it and you almost, your feet go out from under you, even on a dry day, and the bridge just bounces. And it was designed to sway 3 feet from center line in either direction in the wind. And you can stand on that thing and see your perspective shift and feel out how much it's doing. It's not a really cool place to work EMS call.
Well,
It's
especially if you
pretty
don't
hard.
know it, especially if you don't know what's happening, right?
Yeah,
You would think that in something like this, and you start to feel that bridge move, something's going to happen, right? But
yeah.
it's interesting. And again, I actually ran a call in Fort Worth where a car, so you've been in Fort Worth, Kelly, the
Yeah.
mix master that's there in Fort Worth.
Oh yeah.
It connects 820, it connects 30,
Yeah.
it brings you in
DFW
30,
loves those things.
35, right? So it's
Yeah.
35. So it connects all these highways, and there's multi levels of highway. And actually, a car came off the top of the highway and landed on the lower roadway. But even that's scary, right? So,
Yeah.
all right, one more story. Here we go. And this one is crazy. And you've been into the emergency rooms,
Hmm.
and they spend a lot of money
Yeah, and we
on
always brag on them about that.
these
Hey, how about
tropical
better
fish.
salaries?
That's right. All these tropical fish in these aquariums. And our last story occurred February 19th, 2024. In an aquarium likely saved lives when a car crashed into a Texas ED. The driver was killed and 5 people were injured when the car crashed into the ED and St. David's North Austin Medical Center.
Yeah.
And it crashed into this large aquarium, probably taking the brunt of that force of that car, and actually saved more people's lives. Of course, we have 1 life lost. We have 5 people hurt, but I got to say it's probably the best case scenario when
Yeah.
you're doing this. I used to I worked as a consultant with a company who does Amazon deliveries. And Amazon doesn't own the vans that you see around the city. They're
Yeah.
independently owned by private companies and they contract with Amazon. Well, the company that I was working with actually cut a truck off, and the truck jumped the curb and went into up to the bed. It was a pickup truck, up to the bed into a dentist office.
Ooh.
And luckily it was Monday and the dentist was closed on Monday. Or all those people sitting in that chair, they would have been dead.
Oh
And
yeah.
but these things happen, man. I mean,
Yeah.
we remember back in the days of all these. I remember there was a car that went into a building
Yeah.
at a one of those buffet places, like what are they called?
Yeah.
Golden Corral.
Yeah.
Man, I mean, imagine just sitting there eating, and all of a sudden you're on your face. You're down
It
on
being Golden Corral, I bet the people farthest away from it didn't even get up. They're like, "Hey,
your hey,
it's
a
time to
show.
visit the chocolate fountain."
It was, hey, I didn't know that there was dinner and a show.
Oh yeah. All I can think of is somewhere in Austin, Texas, there's a hospital administrator going, "Told you that aquarium was a justified expense." Yeah, you know, but
This is gallows humor, everybody, and this
yeah,
is what we do, right? When we see
yeah,
these calls that make us thank that more people weren't
yeah,
hurt, more people weren't killed, and this is our defense mechanism when we
yeah,
talk about
yeah.
this dark humor that we have.
What we were, yeah, and we do, we take tragedy and pain and turn it into a joke as a defense mechanism. It's not always the best defense mechanism, but that what strikes me is I wonder how the ER staff handled this, because I mean they're talented people. ER physicians and nurses love them to death, and they're great at what they do. But you put them in that EMS situation, and sometimes, despite knowing the medicine, they lock up a little bit, or they're it's rare that they see the patient in the raw and have to pull them out of the vehicle and wade through the glass and the twisted metal and everything. I remember at a small community hospital where I used to work, a police officer hit a gasoline tanker in the side,
Ooh.
wedged his car under it. It didn't spill any gasoline, but it happened literally 100 feet from the emergency department. And when we got there, the railroad tracks were blocked by the tanker. So we had to get on foot across the track. And I counted 8 personnel from the hospital, all tending to this one police officer. And I was like, hey, guys, who's left in the hospital? And the doctor looked up and counted heads and went, oh, crap. And they all went back and said, you got this? Yes, we got this. This is our thing. We'll see you in a minute. But the entire staff of the hospital with 30-something patients, inpatient beds filled, and they just left and went out to play paramedic for a few minutes. But we all get these gnarly scenes. And if you've got something you'd like to share, we'd like to hear about them. Tell us about your no crap, there I was call, because we'd love to hear about it at the show at ems1.com. And for myself and co-host Chris Cebollero, thanks for tuning in to Inside EMS. Going to catch y'all guys next week.
No, not next week. We're going to be off for 2 weeks.
Oh, well, in case that, we'll see you when we're back.